He never imagined the day would come when the woman he once dismissed would rise to power in a courtroom backed by a billionaire's bottomless resources. Yet there she was, testifying against him, her voice unwavering her belly, carrying the life he refused to acknowledge. The cameras flashed, capturing his every grimace, and the hushed tension in the room weighed on him like 1,000 secrets. He'd spent years building his empire, silencing dissent, paying off problems, but this time money couldn't buy his way out. Everything he thought he knew was about to be turned upside down in front of the world. Andrew Fitzgerald prided himself on self-reliance. At 35, he was the epitome of success, or so he believed. Raised in a modest household in Cincinnati, Ohio, he had fought tooth and nail to climb the corporate ladder. His father, Robert Fitzgerald, had worked the assembly line at a local factory for 4 decades, while his mother, Patricia, juggled 2 part-time jobs to help support their 3 children. Andrew often recalled how his siblings, Lisa and Michael, scoffed when he announced his ambitions to become a millionaire by age 30. They found it hard to believe that their baby brother would ever break the Fitzgerald cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck living. But Andrew was different. He devoured every book on business and finance. He could get his hands on titles by Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and other titans of industry. When he wasn't studying, he was out making connections, cold-calling potential mentors, pestering them for advice. Ambition blazed in his eyes, setting him apart from his family who just wanted stability. Andrew wanted more than stability. He wanted wealth and power. After graduating top of his class at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, Andrew landed a job at Linden Capital, one of Chicago's most cutthroat hedge funds. His relentless work ethic and knack for spotting profitable trends in emerging markets earned him quick promotions. By the time he was 30, he had indeed made his first million, surpassing even his own lofty goal. But Andrew wasn't satisfied. With every promotion came a bigger bonus, and with every dollar he earned, his hunger grew. He saw his bank account as a scoreboard, proof that he was winning at life. He crossed paths with Charlotte Madison, a freelance journalist, at a charity gala hosted by the philanthropic wing of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The event had been abuzz with Chicago's most notable business leaders. Andrew, always eager to network, struck up conversations that might lead to new deals. Charlotte had been there on assignment for a small media outlet. She was investigating the reality behind the philanthropic facades of corporate elites, attempting to discover if their charitable acts were genuine or simply polished PR stunts. Andrew first caught her eye as he navigated the room with cool confidence. Tall, well-dressed, and bearing the practiced smile of someone who thrived in social settings, he was impossible to ignore. Charlotte, by contrast, was a quiet observer, tucking herself in the corner's notebook in hand, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. She took notes on the clusters of powerful individuals. She noticed Andrew's easy banter with figures like Mark Cuban, who attended as a guest speaker, and a cameo appearance by famed investor Ray Dalio, who teased Andrew about their friendly rivalries in the market. When Andrew finally approached Charlotte, he recognized her from a fleeting mention in an article he had read. Intrigued, he asked about her work. Charlotte's eyes lit up as she explained her passion for uncovering hidden stories, the ones that big money often tried to bury. She found Andrew's sharp wit engaging even if there was a streak of arrogance in how he talked about the philanthropic game. She was the first person in a long time who didn't fawn over his money or success. There was an electricity between them that neither could ignore. They exchanged business cards. A week later, Andrew invited Charlotte to dinner at one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, letting her pick his brain for her article. The night ended with them lingering on a quiet street corner, the tension crackling. Against all professional judgment, Charlotte found herself drawn to him. For Andrew, it was a welcome break from the monotony of dating women who only saw him as a meal ticket or a career boost. Little did Andrew know that this meeting would set into motion a series of events that would later haunt him. Their attraction was undeniable, but so were the glaring differences in how they viewed the world. They lived in separate realities. Andrew in a lofty tower built by hedge fund millions, Charlotte in a modest Chicago apartment scraping by on freelance checks. Yet for a moment, none of that mattered. They were pulled together by curiosity, the novelty of connecting with someone whose mind worked differently, whose experiences could shed new light on old perspectives. The relationship moved fast, too fast. Within weeks, they were spending nights in each other's homes, bonding over midnight hot chocolates and in-depth talks about global economics and journalism ethics. Andrew took Charlotte to galas and introduced her to his well-connected colleagues, some of whom looked down on her for being just a journalist. Charlotte, never one to back down, held her ground, turning their scorn into a quiet triumph. Andrew found it exhilarating, someone who refused to be intimidated, who had enough self-confidence to stand toe-to-toe with his high-powered associates. Months passed, and the initial glow started to fade as their fundamental differences clashed. Charlotte felt uneasy about Andrew's unwavering loyalty to the corporate world. Andrew couldn't understand why Charlotte insisted on exposing corporate malfeasance. She was biting the hand that fed him. Arguments escalated. Yet they always came back to each other, convinced that what they felt was stronger than the differences that threatened to tear them apart. They never spoke of children or the future, not concretely anyway. Andrew's world was built around quarterly results expansions and the next big acquisition. Charlotte's centered on the next big story, the next expose that could change a broken system. Neither was prepared for the news that would soon ripple through their lives and set the stage for a conflict more dramatic than either could have imagined. When Charlotte found out she was pregnant, her emotions ricocheted from shock to fear, to a strange, guarded excitement. She took a pregnancy test in the dim light of her bathroom, the white tile beneath her feet cold against her bare soles. The faint double line felt like a cosmic shift. She waited a week, quietly scheduling an appointment with a local clinic to confirm the result before breaking the news to Andrew. Andrew's initial reaction was more surprise than anger. He carefully removed his designer glasses, exhaled, and stared at Charlotte. He wasn't sure how he felt. In the world of high-stakes finance, everything was planned, strategic, mapped out. He had never mapped out fatherhood, at least not now. "I need time to think." He murmured, his eyes drifting to the skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The shimmering lights of Chicago offered no answers. Charlotte's voice, trembling, replied, "I'm keeping this baby." She had already made up her mind. Regardless of Andrew's feelings, this was her child. She had always wanted a family someday. The timing wasn't ideal, but life rarely adhered to convenient timelines. Andrew said nothing at first. Days stretched into weeks, and Charlotte felt the wedge between them grow. Occasionally he would leave voicemails or texts. "We need to talk, only to cancel at the last minute." When they did speak, their conversations were terse. Andrew was aloof, promising he'd figure something out, while Charlotte tried desperately to steer him toward the idea of co-parenting. The more she pushed, the more he seemed to shut down. Then came the moment that shattered any remaining hope. Andrew told Charlotte he couldn't risk his future to invest in a child he had never wanted. He spoke in cold business terms, calling it an unplanned liability that might compromise his ambitions. Charlotte was horrified. She had always known Andrew was ambitious, but she never expected him to categorize their child as if it were a miscalculated investment. "She's not a liability. She's my child," Charlotte hissed, tears brimming in her eyes. She had a growing suspicion the baby was a girl, though it was too early for medical certainty. The maternal instinct inside her was blossoming while Andrew's paternal side refused to awaken. Andrew's final words before leaving her apartment that night echoed in her mind. "Don't expect me to foot the bill for your decision." It wasn't just rejection. It was a complete abdication of responsibility. Charlotte felt as if she'd been cast adrift, forced to survive in a storm of her own making. Yet a defiance lit within her. This was no longer about persuading Andrew. This was about standing up for herself and her unborn child. She vowed she would find a way, even if it meant walking away from him for good. But Andrew's betrayal wasn't the end. Fate had a twisted sense of humor. Just when Charlotte thought she'd endure the pregnancy alone, another figure entered her life, someone whose resources and influence would upend Andrew's carefully controlled existence. Charlotte's freelance assignments dried up faster than expected. News outlets were tightening their belts, cutting budgets and focusing on sensationalist stories rather than the investigative pieces she specialized in. To make ends meet, she reached out to her network, hoping for leads on any assignment that could cover her mounting medical bills. It was through a former colleague that she learned about a special project funded by a philanthropic group called the Tolford Initiative. Rumor had it that the group's major benefactor was none other than Felix Talford, a reclusive British billionaire known for sweeping philanthropic gestures and occasional dramatic court battles against large corporations. There were whispers Felix once collaborated with real estate mogul Donald Trump on a property deal, parted ways on bad terms, and then pivoted to philanthropic endeavors as a way to one-up his former associates. The rumor mill even suggested that Bill Gates himself had once tried to recruit Felix to join the Giving Pledge, but Felix had declined, stating he preferred action over pledges. Charlotte found the idea of working for a private philanthropic group intriguing. She'd still be writing potentially highlighting compelling human stories, but she wouldn't be battling for scraps from traditional media outlets. Despite her pregnancy, or perhaps because of it, she needed something stable. Her first meeting with Felix Talford was surreal. It took place in a sleek conference room on the 27th floor of a building in downtown Chicago. Minimalist decor, large windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and a warmth from Felix that she hadn't expected. He was in his late 40s, with a calm smile that reached his blue-gray eyes. Tall and lean, he had a confidence that wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. He listened to Charlotte's story, how she found herself pregnant, how the father refused any support, how her investigative assignments were dwindling. Rather than judge, he simply nodded, peppering her with questions about her journalistic expertise, her passion for uncovering untold truths. It was clear Felix valued integrity above all. To Charlotte's astonishment, Felix offered her a position on the spot. "I can't promise it'll be easy or pay like you're used to, but I believe in your ability to capture stories that matter. You'll lead a new project focusing on social justice, human rights, and corporate accountability." Charlotte was stunned. She glanced down at her belly, anxious about disclosing how her pregnancy might affect her ability to travel or work odd hours. But Felix brushed off her concerns, saying, "We'll figure it out. This child shouldn't stop you from telling the world the stories that need to be told." And so a new chapter began. Charlotte dove into the philanthropic realm, traveling occasionally for domestic assignments, but also working remotely when her morning sickness was too severe. Felix even arranged for her to have an assistant. Petra, a bright graduate student from Northwestern University, who was eager to learn the ropes of investigative journalism. They formed a tight-knit team, gradually unearthing stories of environmental abuses, labor rights violations, and questionable corporate dealings. Their work was rigorous but fulfilling. Over dinners in the penthouse restaurant that Felix sometimes frequented, he would ask Charlotte about her pregnancy, offering quiet support. Never pity. There was a kindness in him that Charlotte hadn't seen in Andrew. Where Andrew spoke in terms of losses and liabilities, Felix spoke in terms of possibilities and hope. He even made sure her health care was covered under the Tolford Initiative's generous benefits. One evening, over a simple meal of roasted vegetables and sparkling water, Felix revealed a more personal side. He shared that he'd grown up in a middle-class family in London, lost his father to a debilitating illness, and swore to use his eventual fortune to improve lives and systems that failed so many. His father's struggle with medical bills had fueled Felix's philanthropic drive. A spark of trust ignited in Charlotte, who opened up about her own upbringing and her complicated relationship with Andrew. She never anticipated how this new partnership might eventually clash with Andrew's ambitions. Nor did she realize that Felix, with his quiet composure, was a formidable opponent with the means and willpower to challenge any threat to Charlotte's or the initiative's well-being. Their synergy as philanthropist and journalist grew into a bond that went beyond boss-employee boundaries. It was a friendship, one that Andrew would soon learn about in the most unexpected and public way. Life for Andrew continued at a breakneck pace. Linden Capital was expanding into risky, high-reward markets. Andrew spearheaded acquisitions that soared in short-term returns, making him even richer. With each new success, his sense of invincibility grew. Occasionally, guilt would gnaw at the back of his mind about Charlotte and the child, but he buried those feelings under piles of spreadsheets and stock tickers. He rationalized that Charlotte had made her choice, and so had he. He even dated around, though never forming any real connection. The moment conversations drifted toward family or future, he'd clam up. He tried not to follow Charlotte's life, but his curiosity got the better of him. Through social media whispers and business gossip, he picked up bits of information she was working for a billionaire philanthropist now. She was investigating corporate misconduct, and she seemed to be thriving, pregnancy and all. Andrew dismissed these rumors, convincing himself Charlotte was exaggerating, using the pregnancy as some twisted leverage for a bigger story. At times, Andrew's friends and colleagues would bring up child support, referencing sensational tabloid stories about millionaires who shirked paternal duties. He'd wave them off, claiming the situation was handled or blown out of proportion. He convinced himself it was better for Charlotte if he stayed away, that he was actually doing her a favor by not interfering. Yet Andrew's web of denial and excuses began to unravel when he found himself staring at an email from the Tolford Initiative requesting Linden Capital's cooperation in an ongoing inquiry into alleged environmental violations by a company under Linden Capital's umbrella. The subject read, "Urgent request for comment on Tolford Initiative investigative findings." Felix Tolford's name was at the bottom of the letter, as well as Charlotte's. Andrew felt a chill run down his spine. He read the letter 3 times, heart pounding. It seemed the Tolford Initiative was preparing to publish a damning report that could cost Linden Capital millions in fines, not to mention the PR nightmare. The email politely outlined alleged illegal dumping of toxic waste in low-income neighborhoods, part of a supply chain that Linden Capital had investments in. Andrew had a week to respond. Anger churned within him. Was Charlotte behind this? A quick phone call to one of his legal advisors confirmed the seriousness of the situation. The Tolford Initiative was known for thorough investigations. They rarely went public unless they had indisputable evidence. If Andrew couldn't kill the story, he'd have to mitigate it. What stung the most was knowing Charlotte's involvement. Had she orchestrated this to get back at him, Andrew wasn't sure if he was being paranoid. Still, the stakes couldn't be higher. He scrambled to convene an emergency meeting with Linden Capital's board. Some members suggested paying hush money to keep the Tolford Initiative quiet. Others suggested going on the offensive, discrediting Felix Tolford and Charlotte personally. Andrew, fueled by panic and betrayal, considered every possible angle. He found a perverse satisfaction in the idea of discrediting Charlotte, painting her as a bitter woman seeking revenge because he'd refused to fund her pregnancy. But rational minds in the boardroom cautioned that attacking a pregnant journalist, especially one backed by a well-respected billionaire, could backfire spectacularly. Andrew's nightmares intensified. He'd dream of swirling headlines, corporate tycoon's love child abandoned, while mother exposes his company's dirty secrets. He'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, fumbling for his phone, scanning news feeds to see if the story had broken. In his few moments of clarity, he asked himself if this was karma for refusing to stand by Charlotte. Time was running out for him to respond to the Tolford Initiative's letter. He had no idea that the real bombshell would drop not in a carefully researched exposé, but in a courtroom drama that would rock his entire world. One crisp afternoon, Andrew stepped out of his office to grab a breath of fresh air. The bustling city noise offered a strange comfort, a reminder he was still in the real world. He turned the corner of the building when a young woman, eyes downcast, approached him. "Mr. Andrew Fitzgerald?" she asked quietly. Andrew nodded, frowning. In her hand was a manila envelope. "You've been served," she said, passing him the envelope. Before Andrew could ask questions, she scurried away, leaving him standing on the crowded sidewalk, stunned. Inside the envelope was a legal summons. Charlotte was taking him to court for paternal support, naming him as the father of her child. She claimed he had refused to acknowledge any responsibility, and she was well within her rights to seek financial and emotional support. Andrew's heart pounded. The test date was scheduled 3 weeks away, and the summons strongly suggested a paternity test and financial disclosures. Andrew's first phone call was to his lawyer. A second later, he texted Charlotte in a rage. "How could you do this? We could have settled this privately." He never got a reply. Instead, a day later, he received a formal letter from the Tolford Initiative's legal team, stating Charlotte would no longer communicate with him outside of official channels. The following weeks were a blur of tense strategy sessions with Andrew's legal team. They debated how to frame his defense. One suggested casting doubt on Charlotte's credibility, but Andrew balked. It was too risky. Another proposed a settlement, but Andrew's pride refused. He felt cornered, humiliated. By now, rumors circulated among his peers. The father of Charlotte's child was the same man at the helm of Linden Capital, the same man who might face environmental lawsuits thanks to Charlotte's investigative findings. The impending court date loomed like a thundercloud. Andrew's personal brand was at stake. For so long he had believed that with enough money, any problem could be solved. This time the problem was a living, breathing child. It was a moral and emotional issue he couldn't solve with the stroke of a pen. In a bizarre twist, the environmental scandal overshadowed the paternity suit. Andrew's legal team juggled 2 crises, each one threatening to topple him. Meanwhile, Charlotte's influence grew under Felix Tolford's mentorship. She landed interviews on respectable media platforms, discussing corporate responsibility, never once mentioning the father of her baby. Yet that subtlety did not diminish the tension. The media loved whispering about who the father might be, fueling speculation that the big reveal would come in court. As the court date approached, Andrew found himself in a sleepless daze. He paced his penthouse, ignoring calls from anxious board members at Linden Capital. He wondered if Charlotte was going to bring Felix Tolford as a witness. The idea felt surreal, two unstoppable forces aligning to destroy him. The courthouse buzzed with reporters. Word had leaked about a mystery father and the presence of a philanthropic billionaire supporting the mother. Camera crews lined the steps, eager for a glimpse of the parties involved. Andrew arrived in a tailored navy suit, flanked by his attorneys, trying to maintain composure amidst the flash of cameras. Onlookers whispered rumors pointing at him. Then came Charlotte, looking poised in a simple black maternity dress, her baby bump impossible to ignore. She walked confidently, her chin high. Beside her was a soft-spoken older man in an impeccable grey suit, Felix Tolford. Murmurs rose among the reporters. Could it be that the rumoured billionaire was here in person to back Charlotte's legal battle? Andrew felt a surge of indignation. Felix Tolford didn't belong in this personal matter. Yet there he was, guiding Charlotte past the throngs of media, ignoring shouted questions about the nature of his involvement. The scene felt absurd, like a plot twist in a theatrical drama. Inside the courtroom, Andrew's lawyer attempted to argue that Charlotte's claims were unsubstantiated and that the paternity test results needed to be established before any talk of support. Charlotte's side calmly agreed. Their position was simple. If Andrew was the father, then the child deserved both emotional and financial care. The judge ordered a paternity test, setting a follow-up hearing in a month. Andrew was relieved to know there'd be at least some breathing room. But the real shock came after the short session ended. As they exited the courtroom, Andrew watched as Charlotte and Felix Tolford engaged in a brief conversation with a group of reporters. Felix stepped forward, his voice measured. "I'm here today to support a personal friend, Ms. Madison, in her quest for justice. We believe in accountability and responsibility, whether it be in the corporate boardroom or in family matters. The Tolford Initiative supports Charlotte's commitment to ensuring her child receives proper care and recognizes her right to hold any relevant party accountable." Andrew seethed. He stormed past a cluster of reporters, ignoring their questions. How dare Felix Tolford, a man Andrew barely knew, involve himself so publicly? Andrew's face felt hot with rage. This wasn't a philanthropic drive. It was war. The next day, headlines screamed, "Billionaire backs pregnant journalist in paternity battle against hedge fund mogul." Social media was ablaze with comments. Some praised Charlotte for fighting for her rights, while others accused her of gold digging. The toxic swirl of online opinion battered Andrew, whose carefully crafted image of success and respectability was under siege. Yet amid the chaos, Andrew's soul cracked a little. For the first time, he wondered what kind of father he might be if he truly was the father. He tried to recall any flicker of excitement at the thought of a child, but all he felt was fear and resentment. He had built a life around measured risks and maximum gains. Fatherhood had never factored into his calculations. In the weeks leading up to the second hearing, Andrew took the paternity test. The wait for the results was excruciating each day, an interminable limbo. His lawyers kept him busy with depositions relating to the environmental scandal, which now had an official investigation launched by the state's Attorney General. The Tallfoot Initiative's report had been escalated to the authorities, further deepening Andrew's troubles. Finally, the day arrived. Andrew sat in a sterile conference room across from Charlotte Felix and their legal team. The court-appointed DNA specialist confirmed the test results. Andrew Fitzgerald was indeed the father. Andrew's stomach lurched. There was no longer room for denial. He gripped the arms of his chair, forcing himself to maintain composure. Charlotte's face was unreadable. Felix placed a supportive hand on her shoulder, a quiet gesture that spoke volumes. Andrew felt a flash of envy. He should have been the one comforting her, not some billionaire with philanthropic flair. Legal negotiations immediately took a new turn. Charlotte's attorneys demanded financial support for prenatal care hospital costs and ongoing child-rearing expenses once the baby was born. They also requested that Andrew set up a trust fund for the child's education. Andrew balked at the numbers. His lawyers countered with a lower offer. Charlotte's team refused to budge, pointing out that Andrew's net worth was more than capable of covering those expenses without breaking a sweat. Felix stood by Charlotte's side, silent but formidable. His presence alone was enough to tip the scales. Everyone in the room understood that if Andrew forced a brutal legal battle, Felix would spare no expense to protect Charlotte's interests. Andrew's lawyers privately advised him that the reputational damage of a drawn-out fight would be astronomical. The story had gained national attention. Any attempt to paint Charlotte as a grasping opportunist might backfire given the moral high ground she possessed. With a nauseous resignation, Andrew agreed in principle to most of the financial terms. Yet even as he signed preliminary paperwork, he felt bitterness coil in his gut. He was cornered, forced to pay for a child he never wanted by a woman who had soared to new heights under the wing of a billionaire rival. He blamed Charlotte, failing to recognize the child's innocence in the matter. That same day, Andrew returned to his penthouse, sank into his leather couch, and stared at the skyline. For the first time since he was a broke student in Cincinnati, Andrew felt powerless. No strategy, no cunning twist, no bribe could extricate him from this predicament without a cost. The looming environmental case only magnified his sense of entrapment. In the silent expanse of his living room, Andrew finally let the truth sink in. He would be a father. A child would soon exist who bore his genes. Everything he had built, all the achievements he prided himself on, now felt hollow. He had monetized every aspect of his life. Yet fatherhood refused to be monetized. It demanded something deeper. While the paternity case drew the media's attention, the environmental scandal roiled beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. The Tallfoot Initiative had shared its findings with the Illinois Attorney General's office, sparking a formal investigation into Linden Capital's potential involvement in toxic dumping. Several of Andrew's top lieutenants were subpoenaed to testify. The board was livid, pressuring Andrew to find a quick resolution. Andrew's crisis managers recommended a public relations campaign. Highlight: Linden Capital's philanthropic efforts feature Andrew in a series of interviews where he portrayed himself as a misunderstood tycoon with a heart of gold. The attorneys, however, cautioned that any public statement could be used against him in court. Andrew was stuck in a tightrope walk between legal caution and reputational salvage. To make matters worse, there were whispers of a class action lawsuit forming, representing low-income communities affected by the pollution. The Tallfoot Initiative was rumored to be offering organizational and financial support to the plaintiffs, though Felix never publicly confirmed it. Every day, Andrew woke up wondering if that would be the day he found himself named as a defendant. Amid this chaos, Andrew received a call from his mother, Patricia. She had seen the news, recognized Charlotte's name, and pieced together that she was carrying Andrew's baby. Patricia was a woman of simple values, having lived her entire life in modest means. She pleaded with Andrew to at least meet Charlotte face to face and show some compassion. She didn't care about legal battles or PR spin. She cared about her grandchild. Andrew brushed off her concerns, claiming he was handling it. Deep down, her words gnawed at him. He began to wonder what his father, hard-working, honorable Robert Fitzgerald, would think if he saw how Andrew was acting. The pang of guilt that followed threatened to unravel the wall of self-justification Andrew had built around himself. As the due date for Charlotte's baby approached, Andrew found himself increasingly isolated. Board members at Linden Capital distanced themselves either to shield their own reputations or to position themselves for a leadership coup if Andrew were forced out. His personal relationships were in tatters. He'd broken off casual dalliances that offered no emotional support. Even old friends found him too toxic to associate with publicly. One afternoon, Andrew sat in a nearly empty corner booth at a dimly lit bar. Unable to face the opulence of high-end clubs, he had retreated to anonymity. He sipped a whiskey neat, lost in thought, when someone slid into the seat across from him. It was Nathan Halliday, a former colleague from Andrew's early days at Linden Capital. Nathan had left the firm to start his own socially responsible investment fund, a choice Andrew had once mocked. Now Nathan was one of the few people who approached Andrew without condemnation or condescension. "I heard about everything," Nathan said gently. "Rough times." Andrew nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Nathan offered a sympathetic smile. "Look, you probably don't want advice from me, but I'll give it anyway. Stop fighting. Do the right thing. Support your child. Take responsibility for the environmental mess if your firm really is at fault, and rebuild from there." Andrew bristled. "That's easy for you to say. You don't know the pressure I'm under." Nathan sighed. "Pressure is part of life. How we respond defines us. Let me tell you something, investors and employees can smell desperation. They also respect a leader who admits mistakes. Right now, you're clinging to illusions of control. You need to face reality." The conversation left Andrew off balance. Part of him wanted to dismiss Nathan's words as naive moralizing. Another part recognized the truth in them. The Andrew Fitzgerald of a decade ago had been hungry, determined, but not cruel. He had believed in some form of ethical boundary. Where had that belief gone? As Andrew parted ways with Nathan, an uneasy sense of introspection settled over him. It haunted him all the way home, seeping into his restless sleep. Late one evening, Andrew's phone vibrated. It was a message from Charlotte's lawyer requesting an urgent conference call. Confused, Andrew dialed in. Charlotte's calm but firm voice greeted him. "My water broke early," she said. "I'm heading to the hospital now." Andrew's mind went blank. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks. Words caught in his throat, but Charlotte continued. "You don't have to come. I just wanted you to know." 1,000 thoughts raced through Andrew's head. He had the legal right to be there, but Charlotte had every reason to bar him from her presence, given how he'd treated her. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and bolted out the door. For the first time in months, his actions weren't dictated by lawyers or public relations. They were dictated by an urgent, primal call his child was about to enter the world. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Andrew approached the reception breathless and was directed to the maternity ward. Charlotte was in a private room, arranged by Felix Tolford. When Andrew finally saw her sweat-drenched hair framing her tense face, his heart twisted. Felix stood on the opposite side of the bed, giving Andrew a sidelong glance, measuring. Hours blurred. Charlotte was in labor, moaning through contractions. Andrew hovered awkwardly, unsure if his presence was wanted. At one point she screamed, and he instinctively reached out to steady her hand. In that moment, she gripped his fingers with a force that belied her exhaustion. The two locked eyes, and for a breath, the lawsuits and animosities vanished. Felix stepped back, allowing Andrew to play his role. Despite the tension, it felt right for the father to be at the mother's side in this most primal moment. Nurses and doctors buzzed in and out, offering reassurance. Andrew stayed, encouraging Charlotte to push counting through contractions, focusing on her face to keep her calm. Tears streaked her cheeks. He whispered apologies she could barely hear above her own cries. When the baby finally arrived, a girl, as Charlotte had suspected, the doctor announced her, with a jubilant, "It's a beautiful baby girl." The newborn's wails tore through the room, an echo of fresh life that drowned out the months of bitterness. Andrew found himself trembling. Charlotte, panting, managed a tired but triumphant smile. Felix offered a quiet nod, stepping away to give them space. A nurse asked if Andrew wanted to cut the umbilical cord. Unsure, he nodded, hands shaking as he took the scissors. The moment felt surreal, an irreversible act that bound him to this small, crying life forever. The baby was placed gently in Charlotte's arms, swaddled in a soft blanket. Andrew peered down at his daughter's scrunched face, overcome by a tidal wave of emotion he didn't fully understand. She was so fragile, so innocent. All his rationalizations about not wanting a child crumbled under the weight of her tiny existence. The idea that he had ever considered her a liability felt monstrous. Charlotte's face softened. She glanced at Andrew, tears brimming, and simply said, "Do you want to hold her?" Without waiting for his response, she delicately passed the baby into Andrew's unsure arms. The infant's cries ebbed slightly, as though sensing something familiar in Andrew's shaky presence. In that instant, Andrew Fitzgerald's world shifted. Whatever illusions he'd held about being in control, about money and success defining his worth, faded in the glow of this new, perfect life. He cradled his daughter against his chest, a single tear slipping down his cheek. For the first time in ages, Andrew felt both completely vulnerable and deeply alive. Mother and baby rested in the hospital room, the ordeal of labor behind them. Andrew lingered, reluctant to leave. Charlotte's exhaustion was evident, her eyes fluttering, but a hint of relief curved her lips. Felix approached quietly, offering Andrew a polite nod. In another life, they might have been allies, billionaire and hedge fund manager, bridging philanthropy and finance. In this one, they were entangled in a personal and professional storm. Felix suggested stepping outside to let Charlotte rest. Andrew followed him into the hospital corridor. The sterile white walls pressed in on them as they stood face to face, the hum of overhead lighting the only sound. "She's a brave woman," Felix said. "She's been under tremendous stress these past months. I hope you realize that." Andrew's throat felt tight. "I do. I also realize I could have done things differently. But it's complicated." Felix took a measured breath. "It's only as complicated as you make it, Andrew. You have a child now. Whether or not you want to be in her life is your decision, but the law and morality demands that you support her. If you choose otherwise, I'll do everything in my power to ensure Charlotte and her daughter have the resources they need." Andrew tensed. "Is that a threat?" "A promise," Felix replied calmly. I won't apologize for protecting them. But I'd rather see you rise to the occasion. Perhaps this can be a turning point for both your personal life and your business practices." Before Andrew could respond, a nurse informed them that Charlotte needed some rest and that visiting hours were over. Felix shook Andrew's hand in a surprisingly cordial gesture. Andrew lingered a moment, peering through the glass at his newborn daughter in the neonatal viewing area. He felt something akin to awe overshadowed by dread at the tidal wave of responsibility. Charlotte named the baby Emily Madison Fitzgerald. She gave the father's last name to Emily, even though she was within her right to name her otherwise. When Andrew first heard the name, it stirred conflicting emotions: gratitude that Charlotte acknowledged his role, and a paralyzing fear that he was ill-equipped to be anyone's father. Over the ensuing weeks, Andrew visited the hospital sporadically, always battling the swirl of paparazzi who hoped to capture the deadbeat dad turned doting father. He told himself it was to keep up appearances, but in truth, each time he held Emily, he felt a glimmer of paternal instinct he couldn't deny. Meanwhile, at Linden Capital, the board grew restless. The Attorney General's office moved closer to filing charges. Some shareholders were threatening a revolt, demanding Andrew's resignation to salvage what was left of the company's reputation. The tension came to a head when Andrew realized he couldn't focus. His priorities were shifting against his will. He found himself wanting to see Emily rather than attend board meetings. One day, Andrew snapped at a board member who criticized him for letting his personal issues overshadow the firm's objectives. Standing at the head of a long, polished table, Andrew glared around the room and said, "I won't deny I have personal responsibilities, but I'm also the CEO. If anyone has a problem with that, they can leave." A few did walk out, spooking the others. Andrew felt a wave of frustration. He left the building, ignoring the questions from anxious employees. On a whim, he decided to drive to Charlotte's apartment, a modest place in a quiet neighborhood on Chicago's North Side. He found her sitting in a small living room, Emily asleep in a bassinet. Charlotte's face was still tired, but the soft radiance of motherhood glowed around her. Andrew hesitated at the door, fumbling with an apology. She quietly let him in, inviting him to see the baby. Emily stirred, and Andrew gently lifted her, cradling her carefully. For the first time in his life, Andrew Fitzgerald felt he was exactly where he needed to be. That tender moment was shattered when Andrew's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an urgent message from one of his senior executives. "Subject line, we have a problem." Andrew excused himself, stepping into the hallway to take the call. The board had voted to temporarily remove him from critical decision-making, citing distractions and potential legal entanglements. Andrew felt betrayed and enraged, but in the background he could hear Emily fussing and Charlotte's soothing voice. It was a fork in the road. Should he fight tooth and nail to keep control of the company and quell these crises? Or should he embrace fatherhood, face accountability, and rebuild from a place of integrity? Andrew ended the call, returning to find Charlotte watching him with an unreadable expression. She didn't say a word, but her eyes asked the question, "Who are you going to be?" "Andrew." The environmental case advanced swiftly. Key executives at Linden Capital were indicted, and the media feasted on the scandal. Andrew found himself named in the suit, alleged to have had knowledge of the toxic dumping, though whether he had actively participated was still under investigation. Share prices plummeted. Investors demanded accountability. Andrew's lawyers strategized a defense that might lay blame on lower-tier managers. They claimed Andrew had been kept in the dark. But damning emails surfaced, including at least two, in which Andrew's name was in the CC line, referencing Project Greywater, the code name for dumping. It was unclear if Andrew had ever read them, but his name was there, a black mark in the eyes of the public. Public outrage skyrocketed. Protesters rallied outside Linden Capital's doors, brandishing signs about corporate greed and environmental justice. Felony charges were floated by the Attorney General's office, though it was uncertain if they would stick to Andrew himself. In an attempt to salvage the firm, the board demanded Andrew step down at least temporarily. Resisting might mean the entire company collapsed, leading to thousands of layoffs. Andrew fought tears of frustration alone in his office, the city skyline mocking him. He thought about Emily, the life he'd brought into this world. He had wanted success at any cost, but now the cost was too steep. In a final board meeting, Andrew conceded. He announced he would step aside as CEO, taking leave to deal with personal matters and cooperate with the investigation. In a tense, solemn vote, the board accepted his resignation. Andrew walked out a box of personal items in his arms, past employees who avoided eye contact. The empire he had built was no longer his. For a while, Andrew retreated from public life, holed up in his penthouse, uncertain of his next move. The fear of criminal charges loomed through his lawyers indicated a plea deal might be possible if he cooperated fully. Andrew spent hours pacing his mind, drifting to Emily's face. One morning he gathered the courage to call Charlotte. She answered, her voice neutral. He asked if he could see Emily. After a long pause, she agreed on the condition. He come to them no chauffeurs, no pretense. When he arrived at her apartment, Andrew was startled by how modest it was, a far cry from his opulent lifestyle. Yet there was warmth in every corner, a baby swinger playmat, pictures of Charlotte's family on the mantel. Emily was napping in her bassinet, tiny hands curled into fists. Charlotte offered him coffee, and they spoke in hushed tones so as not to wake the baby. Hesitantly, Andrew apologized, not just for refusing financial support, but for dismissing Charlotte's needs, and for how he had let his ambition blind him. She listened, eyes revealing both hurt and cautious hope. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Andrew said quietly. "I just want to do better. For Emily." Charlotte considered him. Emily deserves a father who will show up, not just financially, but emotionally. Andrew nodded, tears pricking his eyes. "I'm ready to try." Over the following weeks, Andrew took small steps toward rebuilding a relationship with Charlotte and forging a bond with Emily. He changed diapers badly at first, learned how to rock Emily to sleep, and discovered the odd delight of hearing her coo. Every giggle felt like redemption. Every crying fit a lesson in patience he desperately needed. Felix Tolford remained in the background, cordial but watchful. He offered no apology for his earlier stance. Andrew couldn't blame him. Felix had acted in Charlotte's best interest, something Andrew was only beginning to understand. Eventually, the paternity suit evolved into a formal hearing on child support and custody. Despite Andrew's newfound willingness to participate, the legal wheels had to turn. The media turned out again in droves, itching for a dramatic finale. Andrew arrived at the courthouse differently this time. No entourage, no posture of defiance. He looked more like a man humbled by circumstances than a corporate titan. Charlotte sat at a table with her attorney. Felix was present, but merely as moral support. During the proceedings, Charlotte's lawyer acknowledged Andrew's voluntary financial contributions made since Emily's birth, including the establishment of a trust fund. They cited Andrew's resignation from Linden Capital as evidence he was taking steps to address the environmental scandal. Andrew's lawyer emphasized his commitment to being involved in Emily's life. The judge, stern and pragmatic, finalized the child support arrangement, ensuring Emily's future was secure. Visitation rights were set, with Charlotte retaining primary custody until Emily was older. An additional clause required Andrew to participate in parenting classes and therapy sessions, a measure intended to facilitate his transition into fatherhood. As the gavel came down, the case ended more anticlimactically than the media had hoped. There were no fiery speeches or dramatic breakdowns. Instead, there was the solemn weight of an official record. Andrew Fitzgerald was recognized as Emily's father, legally bound to support and nurture her. Stepping out of the courtroom, Andrew came face to face with the throng of reporters again. But this time, he offered a simple statement. "I love my daughter. I will do what's right for her and her mother. I ask for privacy as we move forward." Felix and Charlotte stood to one side, quietly observing. The flash of cameras lit the moment like a surreal stage. Then, with measured steps, Charlotte walked over. She handed Emily now a bright-eyed infant, curious about the noise, to Andrew. Cameras went wild, capturing the father holding his daughter, the mother standing beside him, and the billionaire who had made it all possible in the background. Thus concluded one chapter in their lives. Yet another was just beginning. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster, a story of love, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. Andrew Fitzgerald's rise and fall remind us that success without integrity can lead to ruin, while true victory often lies in taking responsibility. Charlotte Madison's unwavering resolve shows the strength it takes to stand up for what's right, even when it means challenging a powerful adversary. Felix Talfourd's quiet but unyielding support underscores that genuine wealth is measured by the difference we make in others' lives. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with friends who might need a spark of courage, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that reflect life's toughest challenges and the resilience within us all. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.